The loan officer's pen tapped 3 times on the desk before he looked up. "Mr. Hendricks, I'm sorry. We can't approve this." March 1987. The office smelled like carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. Dale Hendricks sat across from Tom Brewster. Same guy who'd approved his dad's equipment loans for 20 years, same guy who'd shaken his hand at the funeral 6 months before, and watched him slide the application back across the desk, unsigned. $23,500. That's what Dale needed. Enough for a used John Deere, 4440, maybe 8 years old, high hours, but serviceable. Enough to replace the 734020 that had thrown a rod in November, right in the middle of combining the last 40 acres of soybeans. "Your debt-to-asset ratio is outside our parameters," Brewster said, numbers on paper. Like that explained everything. Dale didn't argue. But he picked up the folder, said thank you, and walked out to his pickup. A '79 Ford F-150, bench seat patched with duct tape, passenger window that wouldn't roll up all the way. He sat there in the bank parking lot for maybe 10 minutes, watching people go about their business. Hardware store across the street. Grain elevator down by the tracks. Life continuing like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Before we go further, I need to tell you something about what you're about to hear. This story is built on documented realities from the late 1980s farm crisis, USDA Economic Research Service data, auction records from Central Illinois, and first-hand accounts from farmers who lived through it. Some details come from interviews conducted years later, others from agricultural economics reports published at the time. It's a constructed narrative, but it's anchored in what actually happened to people like Dale Hendricks across the Midwest during those years. And if you lived through the 80s farm crisis, if you remember watching neighbors pack up and leave, if you know what it feels like to sit in a banker's office and hear no, I want to hear about it in the comments. Because this story isn't unique. It's one version of thousands. The 80s farm crisis didn't happen overnight. It built slowly, like water rising behind a dam. Interest rates that had been 6% in the 1970s shot up to 21% by 1981. Land values that had soared during the export boom collapsed. Farmers who'd expanded on borrowed money, encouraged to get big or get out, suddenly found themselves underwater. By 1985, farm debt stood at $216 billion nationally. Our farm bankruptcies were running at levels not seen since the Depression. Dale's father had died in September 1986. Heart attack in the barn, feeding calves before sunrise. 71 years old and still working harder than most men half his age. He left Dale 480 acres, 320 owned, 160 rented, and $67,000 in debt. The land was worth something, sure, but not what it had been worth 5 years earlier. And debt doesn't care about market corrections. The 4,020 dying wasn't dramatic. No explosion, no fire. Just a sound like marbles in a coffee can, then nothing. Dale knew what it meant. Knew he couldn't afford to rebuild it. $4,000 minimum, probably more like $6,000 if the cylinder walls were scored. And he definitely couldn't afford a replacement. So he did what you do when you can't afford what you need. He improvised. 2 weeks after the bank said no, Dale drove 40 miles south to an implement graveyard outside Taylorville. Guy named Vernon Oakes ran the place, 30 acres of salvaged farm equipment, everything from 1930s Farmalls to wrecked combines, all slowly rusting back into the Illinois dirt. Vernon charged by weight for scrap, but if you wanted to haul something out whole, he'd negotiate. Dale found it in the back corner, partially hidden behind a grain cart with no wheels. Farmall 560, 1958 model. Red paint faded to pink in places, oxidized to brown in others. Both rear tires flat. Front-end loader attachment bent at an angle that suggested it had hit something hard, or something hard had hit it. Engine frozen. Dale tried the crank, got maybe a quarter turn before it locked solid. Most people would have walked past it. Most people did walk past it. Vernon wanted $500 for it. Dale stood there looking at that tractor for a long time. The 560 wasn't a small machine. It had been IH's big row crop tractor in its day, the first of their line to use a 6-cylinder engine. The C263 gas motor made 60 horsepower, could pull a 4-bottom plow if you needed it to. Live PTO hydraulic system, all the features that made it legitimate when new. But this one had clearly been sitting for years. Weeds grew up through the engine compartment. Birds had nested in the air cleaner. The seat was rotted through to the springs. He didn't need to think about it long. He already knew. $500 bills counted out into Vernon's hand. Cash from the coffee can in the kitchen cupboard. Money Dale's mother had saved from selling eggs, kept back for emergencies. Of this qualified. Getting it home required borrowing his neighbor's equipment trailer and a tractor big enough to winch the 5.6 up the ramps. The whole thing took 4 hours and involved some creative use of chains and prayer. When they finally lowered it in Dale's machine shed, same shed where his grandfather had worked on Farmalls in the 1950s, same concrete floor with oil stains that had been there since before Dale was born, the neighbor looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "You're really going to rebuild that thing?" "Don't have much choice," Dale said. And that was the truth of it. No choice? Not really? Not if he wanted to farm his ground that spring. Not if he wanted to hold on to what his father and grandfather had held on to. Not if he wanted to avoid becoming another statistic in the farm crisis body count. The work started the next morning. First thing, drain everything. Oil thick as molasses, water rusty as blood, fuel that looked like varnish. The engine wouldn't turn by hand, which meant it was seized, likely from water in the cylinders, freeze damage, or both. Dale pulled the spark plugs, sprayed penetrating oil down each cylinder, let it sit overnight. Next day, same thing. Third day, same thing. By the fourth day, with a 3-foot breaker bar on the crank pulley, he felt it move. Just a fraction. But movement. He worked on it every day through March and April, mornings before dawn, evenings after dark, weekends when he should have been preparing fields. The shed had a wood stove, same one his grandfather had installed in 1947, and Dale kept it burning, working in coveralls and a coat, breath visible in the air. And the engine came apart slowly. Head bolts so rusted he had to heat them with a torch. Pistons that had to be driven out with a brass drift and a 5-pound hammer. Cylinder walls scored but not terminal, serviceable with a hone and new rings. The crankshaft was worse. Surface rust in the journals, wear beyond what could be cleaned up with emery cloth. Dale pulled it on a Tuesday morning, loaded it in the bed of the pickup, drove it to Miller's machine shop in Springfield. The machinist, guy named Ray who'd been grinding cranks since the 50s, measured the journals, checked for cracks, gave Dale the news. "I can save it. Take about a tenth off, bring it back to spec. $75, 3 days. Dale left it there. Drove home wondering if those journals would clean up or if he'd need to start hunting for a replacement crank. At 3 days of not knowing, not working, just waiting. When he picked it up Friday afternoon, Ray handed him the crankshaft wrapped in newspaper, journals polished smooth, micrometers marks still visible in pencil on the wrapping. "She'll run another 100,000 miles, Ray said. The valves needed lapping, every gasket needed replacing. Dale worked methodically, everything by the book, everything torqued to spec. His father had taught him, nights in this same shed, teaching a boy to read micrometers and gap rings, to check bearing clearances and set valve lash. Those lessons mattered now. Parts were the problem. IH had built the last 560 in 1963. Finding new old stock parts in 1987 meant phone calls to every salvage yard within 200 miles, classified ads in farm papers, our trips to farm auctions hoping someone would be selling off old IH inventory. Dale spent $180 on piston rings and bearing sets from a guy in Iowa who'd bought out a defunct dealership's back room. The complete gasket set cost $95 from a supplier in Wisconsin. He found a rebuilt carburetor at a farm auction for $125. Overpaid, probably, but he needed it. The radiator core went to a shop in Decatur for reconditioning, $140. Then the smaller things. Hoses that had dry rotted, belts cracked and brittle, new oil filter, fuel filter, air filter, miscellaneous bolts and fittings to replace things too rusted to save. Another $110. Total parts cost by the time he was done, $725. Add the crankshaft grinding, $75. Grand total, $800. Plus the $500 for the tractor itself. $1,300 to get back in business. Still a lot of money when you're broke. But it wasn't $23,500. By late April, the engine was back together. Dale filled it with oil, mixed fresh gas, pulled the choke. The first time he hit the starter button, nothing happened. Dead battery. He jumped it from the pickup. Second attempt, the engine turned over, coughed, died. Third attempt, it caught. 6 cylinders firing in sequence. That straight 6 rumble, smoother than the old 4-bangers, deeper than modern diesels. Exhaust smoke blue-white from new rings not yet seated. The sound filled the shed. Dale sat on that patch seat and let it run for 30 minutes, watching gauges, listening for problems. Oil pressure came up, temperature stabilized. No knocks, no rattles, no valve clatter. Just the steady rhythm of an engine that had been dead and was now alive. He shut it down, stood there in the quiet afterward. His hands were shaking, not from fear or exhaustion, from something else, something closer to defiance. The bank had said no. The numbers had said impossible. Common sense had said walk away. And here was a tractor, old, ugly, salvaged from a junk pile, running like it had 20 years left in it. Because it did. Dale used that 560 to plant 480 acres that spring. Corn and soybeans. He pulled a 6-row planter, not fast, not fancy, but steady. The tractor burned gas instead of diesel, which was expensive, but it ran. It showed up every morning and did the work. Harvest that fall, he still needed to rent a combine. But the 5.6 hauled grain to the elevator. It moved equipment around the yard. It did everything he needed it to do. The loan officer never asked about it, probably never knew. Dale made his debt payments, enough to keep current. Not enough to get ahead, but enough. He held on, and that tractor kept running. 1988, 1989. Into the 90s as commodity prices slowly recovered, as the worst of the crisis passed, as farms that had survived started to stabilize. Dale Hendricks still farms that ground today, different equipment now, newer tractors, bigger planters. But the 5.6 sits in the shed, maintained, operational. He starts it every few months, lets it run. Listens to that 6-cylinder rumble. Because it's not just a tractor, it's proof that when the system says no, when the numbers don't work, when every reasonable voice tells you it can't be done, sometimes you can pull something from a junk pile, rebuild it with your hands and the help of people like Ray at the machine shop, and make it work anyway. The farm crisis of the 1980s destroyed thousands of farms. That's documented, that's real, but it didn't destroy them all. Some people found a way, sometimes with a $500 Farmall and enough stubbornness to bring it back to life. Under this video, you'll see a subscribe button, a small action with a big meaning. By pressing it, you're not only supporting the creation of more content like this, but you're also becoming part of the very exchange we've been talking about, giving and receiving in harmony. It's not about the size of the action, it's about the meaning. A simple subscription tells me these words reached you. It tells me that the effort, the late nights, and the discipline to bring this message forward mattered to someone on the other side of the screen.